Hi, I'm Andy Ruddick, and this is a short video just to introduce you to ATS 2439 Youth and Media. What I'm going to do in this very short video is just tell you a little bit about what the unit is about. So we are calling the unit Youth Media, Understanding Media Research. And I suppose the first point I want to make is that this is really a unit that's going to allow us to research how media actively create social reality. So this is the big idea that we're trying to explore. How can we think about research that's been done about young people in the media in a way that allows us to identify how media actively create reality? So this is a bit of a different idea from the sorts of ideas that we usually encounter about the media. We might think of the media as things that represent the world and either get things right or get things wrong. Obviously, that's an idea that's very current at the moment with all concern about fake news, for example. But one of the things we're going to be doing here is thinking about how media influence exists on a deeper level, about the ways in which media actually make the world in the way that we experience it. And I suppose there are three main ideas that I want you to think about with regard to how studying young people and media tells us how media really create the world in which we live. And the first is the idea that media create the social ideas that we use. So one of the interesting things that we encounter is that in some ways, youth isn't something that we are or something that we have, but it's actually a social idea that we use. And media are highly involved in how that social idea has been created and what it does. And let me give you an example from the 19th century of what I mean. If we go back to the 19th century and the history of public hanging, we see one of the first examples of how media created the idea of youth in a way that had a political impact. And this is quite important because it's an early indication of how media can create the ideas that we use to make sense of our world, also in a way that has a political effect. And the case study that I'm going to talk about in this regard comes from this book, The Hanging Tree by Vic Gattrell. And this book is about the history of public execution in England, and importantly, the way that something that was essentially a form of popular entertainment, believe it or not, suddenly changed, suddenly ended, suddenly became something which was abhorrent to public sensibilities because of the way that media created the idea of youth. And I'm going to explain this in relation to this young man here. This confronting image is the death mask of a 14-year-old boy called John Amy Bird Bell. So what you're seeing here is a plaster cast of a 14-year-old boy who was hung for murder and robbery. In 1832, I believe. Now, one of the things that Vic Gattrell talks about is how this particular execution became a turning point in the history of public execution and was a first indicator of how media stories about youth actually came to have a political impact on the world in which we live. So, John Amy Bird Bell was a 14-year-old boy who was executed for murder and robbery. But probably the most confronting thing about this particular image is the knowledge that thousands of people turned up to watch this boy being hung. And on the day that he was executed, nobody was particularly bothered about it. John Amy Bird Bell was not the first child to be executed in England. and he wasn't even the youngest. This is all taken from Vic Cattrall. What made John Amy Bird Bell different from all of the other young people who were executed in this period was that his execution was seized upon by journalists who felt that public executions were really an anathema to civilized society. These were spectacles that didn't have a place in what people were coming to understand as civilized society at that time. And so contemporaneous journalistic accounts of the execution of John Amy Bird Bell turned what was horrifically a fairly mundane incident, the execution of a poor young person, into a melodramatic tragedy. And the way that John Amy Bird Bell was transferred into a youthful symbol of the barbaric nature of execution became instrumental in a fairly sudden change where public opinion turned against public execution. And so it was the beginning of the end for public execution as a form of popular entertainment. So this is an example of how media created a story about youth which had a political effect. And this is one of the reality effects that we could talk about with relation to media. They create ideas and narratives that societies use to make sense of where they are and also to make sense of where they're going. So the first reason to study young people and media is that the idea of youth is a media narrative that has a political purpose. Now, if we were to jump forward to the present day, we can see that this dynamic continues. Now, I want to direct you to this resource, which is an incredibly valuable resource on popular news stories about the social influence, the social impact of media. And we're going to be talking about this resource in some depth. But one of the things you will notice is the high degree of concentration on things like violence, but also on the damage that media are deemed to do to young people. So the very first image here suggests that child exposure to superhero culture creates aggressive, badly adjusted people. Down here again, we see the way that parents are concerned about the way they're setting a bad example for their children in the way that they watch television. Again, on-screen violence damages children as much as seeing it in reality. What we see here is that we live in a world where the social impact of the media is a very hot topic, is something which is discussed across a range of issues, from, I suppose at the moment particularly, the idea that the media and entertainment has had a particularly damaging effect on the nature of our political systems. But again, one of the things that you see in this, in a very high profile, is if you look at the way that the media talk about the social impact of media, it's quite often in relation to the damage that media do to young people. And this also involves constructing young people as particular kinds of people, as people who are, for example, especially vulnerable to the impact of media. This is another example of how the media framing of youth has a political effect. one of the things we're going to be seeing, for example, is that there's no necessary reason why, if we're talking about the social impact of media, we should necessarily talk about the damage that media do, or that we should necessarily focus on the damage that people do, the damage that media do to young people. There's all kinds of reasons to suggest that adults, under certain circumstances, are more susceptible to media influence than young people are. But again, what we have here is the idea that media discourses, media stories about young people actually have a real impact on how we understand the world in which we live. In this case, the way that we understand the role of media industries in social life. But another way that media, that young people and media tell us a lot about the social impact of media, relates to the way that youth is a form of identity that's lived in relation to media, that being youthful, doing youth, if you like, also involves doing media. By this I mean, what we do is we kind of take symbols and stories that we've learned from the media, and we actually use those in the lives that we lead. And this is particularly the case quite often with young people. Let me give you an example from Australia.
Eric, in our segment, what were they thinking? For this, we take you down under, throw a shrimp on the Barbie. Let's go to Australia. A house party got way out of hand on Saturday. A lot of people, about 500, showed up at a house after a teenager advertised the party on the internet. The cops were called to the scene. Their cars got damaged. People were throwing stuff at the police cars.
The cop cars got damaged?
Yeah, the police were in show. Those are the parents of the kid who didn't know the party was going on. That's the kid who was throwing the party. As you can see, many of his friends were running around half naked with dogs. I don't know what was going on. The cops had to call for backup. The dog squad came in. The teen who threw the bash, this kid named Delaney, has actually now been arrested. That's him in the glasses. But before he was arrested, he refused to answer his parents' phone calls. They were away. They've been calling him for like a day. But he did talk to the local media. He wouldn't talk to his parents, but he talked to the local media. Listen.
What have your parents had to say, Corey?
I haven't really talked to them because every time they call, I don't answer. Because, yeah, they'll probably try to kill me.
So that's a short-term strategy. You're going to have to talk to them eventually. What are you going to say?
Sorry.
Sorry?
Sorry?
And she sort of tries to, like, get him to apologize and sort of be,
teach him a lesson.
Exactly,
maybe.
to be reflective. And she also tries to get him to take off his glasses.
Take off your glasses and apologise to us.
I'll say sorry, but I'm not taking off my glasses.
Ooh. Why not?
Because they're famous.
What would you say to other kids who were thinking of partying when their parents are out of town?
Get me to do it for you.
Get you to do it for you. Not don't do it.
Nah, get me to do it for you. Best party ever so far. That's what everyone's been saying, so...
Well, we've got to go, but I suggest you go away and take a good long hard look at yourself.
I have. Everyone has. They love it.
They love it. They love me. They love my glasses. I'm the #1 party man in Australia.
Yeah, he didn't even zip up his shirt and,
Is he for real?
I don't know. It doesn't. There's something about it doesn't seem real to me.
I mean, the footage of the party is so clear.
But then I saw another news report the next day where they follow up with the kid on the beach. I don't know if it's real or not, but it's very funny.
I really enjoyed it. I'm not going to lie.
I like that he refuses to take off.
The next day, did we see what he looked like without the glasses?
No, he was wearing the glasses the next day, and he still hadn't called his parents or picked up the phone. He's now been arrested though, so we'll keep following it.
Perfect.
Okay, so the point I want to make about that video is it illustrates how, so the story there is, as some of you may recall, I think this was back in 2007, a teenager from Narre Warren called Corey Delaney, or Worthington, depending on the accounts that you saw, had a party. It got out of hand. Police helicopters were called. And the there was talk of the parents being fined or landed with the $20,000 bill that it cost to scramble the police helicopter. And this is why it becomes a big story. But the thing that's notable about this particular story is the way that Corey Delaney appears to have understood how to deal with media attention through the language of celebrity. If you watch that clip again, he was very clearly aware that this was an opportunity to brand himself for a global audience. So he's a young man who's found himself in all kinds of strife, and he's trying to think about how to deal with that. And his response is to respond in the language of celebrity, to deal with his situation not as a naughty boy, but as a celebrity who's marked by a trademark, an ability to perform on camera, an ability to enjoy the attention of the limelight, an ability to recognize that he's in a celebrity situation. So the question this raises is, how do young people live their youthful lives in relation to media narratives, ideas about what it means to live a youthful life, what it's appropriate to do? And if we can understand how young people do that, then we can also understand how other sorts of people might do that as well. And the idea that we think and act in social in social situations, in relation to media narratives. So very often when we find ourselves in a particular situation, we might guide what we're going to do in relation to what we've learned from media, fictional and non-fictional. This is quite an important and powerful idea. So again, the second reason for studying youth and media is that the question of how people live their youthful identities in relation to media narratives and technologies is an important foundational idea in media effects as a whole. But now let's just go back to James Shanahan's Flipboard sheet and come up with the third reason why studying youth media is important to the pursuit of media studies in general. And this is that if you look at all of the big debates about how media influence society, they've all been studied in relation to young audiences. Now, rightly or wrongly, and I think it's largely wrongly, quite often when you talk to people about media influence, the first thing that they think about is the way that media harm young people. There's all kinds of reasons why there's a problem with that. And there's all kinds of reasons why that shouldn't necessarily and doesn't have to be the first question that you ask. But the fact nevertheless remains that the question of what media do to young people and what media do in the lives of young people has driven many innovations in media research, such that if you understand the research that's been done on young people in the media, you understand media research in general. And this is one of the things that we're going to be finding about. One of the things that you see in all of these stories is the way that a range of social questions about what media do to society have been studied by scholars in relation to young people and youthful media genres. So if we understand that research, then we understand media research in general, and then also we understand how to become media researchers. And I'm just going to leave it there. So the reasons for studying young people and media is understanding the research on young people and media is an excellent way to become a media researcher. And it's an excellent way to understand how media create social reality in two ways. One, by creating the ideas that we use to think about society, the ideas that we use to think about the political alternatives that our societies face. And two, in providing the ideas that we use in everyday social situations to live our lives. And so those are the reasons and those are the outcomes that we want to have in studying this subject.